Welcome to this episode of International Tax Bites and Tax Snacks. I am here with Graham Jackson of Hassan's in Gibraltar.
Hello, Harriet. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Graham.
How are you?
I am very well. How are you?
I'm not bad.
And thank you for being 50% a guest and 50% a presenter.
Well, it's good because you're the one that knows all about what we're going to talk about. So I'll just nod and ask questions if you want me to.
I like it if you nod. I prefer it if you nod quietly, if that's all right.
Okay. How it normally works. So for those of you that don't know, the Tax Snacks viewers, Harriet and I present a podcast called International Tax Bites that this is going to go out as an episode of. And she basically just talks and I nod quietly.
Well, no, I think the best episodes you nod quietly. The other ones are when you talk as well.
Okay, thank you.
And
so
everybody who listens to International Tax Bites, Tax Snacks is a video podcast produced by Old Square Tax Chambers, which talks about a variety of tax topics, topical and not so topical, in short video bites, as it were. Yeah. And so we've got a crossover today.
So that's why, for the ITB listeners, this is a more UK-based episode. But there's been an interesting story in the news, hasn't there, Harriet?
There has, yes, there has. And this sort of happened around the time of, this sort of happened around just after the budget. And this is the OnlyFans creators getting tax-deductible breast implants. And I'm going to be completely honest, that is the BBC headline on this article.
It is, and I'm going to be very cautious in my language. So, I mean,
yes.
that's. I mean, it's obviously been reported in shock, Daily Mail style. No offense to the Daily Mail.
Well, I think it was actually the Mail on Sunday who first found it. If you read the BBC article, they say that they sort of dug this out of the Mail on Sunday.
Yes, they say it's the first known case of this of its kind. But I'm guessing there are analogous cases, Harriet, that you're going to explain to us.
Well, I don't know. In terms of cosmetic surgery, I'm not aware of any case law per se. So really what this relates to is the tax concept of wholly and exclusively. And wholly and exclusively is relevant for business taxes because in the UK, whether you are paying income tax or corporation tax, you can deduct expenses from your you deduct expenses from your overall turnover, which were wholly and exclusively for the purposes of the business.
And that doesn't apply to employees; they can't deduct.
And not under the business tax regime, no. And that is what's being talked about here, where you have sort of somebody on OnlyFans who is selling videos or photographs or whatever it is that people sell on OnlyFans. Content, yes. Who sell their content, who I assume are usually going to be at this stage self-employed.
Yeah.
And so the question then arises, when can breast enhancement surgery or any form of cosmetic surgery be wholly and exclusively for the purposes of a trade?
Yeah, because it's sort of, well, it's permanent, isn't it? And it's not something you only use whilst working.
Well, this is really interesting. So what I really like about this is sort of the paradigm case on wholly and exclusively is a case called Drummond and Mallew. And Ms. Mallew was a barrister. She was an English barrister, and she sought to deduct from the profits of her profession as a barrister the cost of sort of smart suits and high-necked shirts for wearing to court. And the reason she said she wanted to do this, or the reasons that were set out in the case report anyway, are that she would never have bought these clothes but for the fact that she had to wear them to court. And what had happened was in preceding years, guidance had been given as to what people should wear to court, because women in particular, I suspect, were turning up in outfits that were considered not to be appropriate. Now, we should say this was a case in the late 70s. I think the case was actually in the early 80s, but related to tax years in the late 70s. So there'd been this guidance, and it's a judgment that bears reading for some of the language alone. And so that was really the issue. She said, well, look, I wouldn't buy these clothes, but for the fact I've been told I need to wear them to court. And that was the issue there. And were they therefore wholly and exclusively for the purposes of her profession as a barrister? Now, the other thing that you should note here is that male barristers in England and Wales have a uniform that they can choose to wear, and almost none do anymore, though there are the odd one or two, of striped trousers and sort of a black, it's not a waistcoat technically because it's got arms, but it's sort of like a black coat that buttons all the way up the front. And the cost of those are in fact considered to be tax deductible. And so one can imagine that Miss Mallew was rather making a point in any event about tax deductibility. And so that's why I like this story, because we're looking at two sides of the same coin many years apart.
Okay, so did she win?
She did not win. No, poor Miss Mallew did not win. And the reason she didn't win,
She's not very poor, she's a barrister, right?
well, I mean, it depends. You should, again, just to give some context, nowadays junior tax barristers have really quite shockingly low earnings given the amount they have spent in education expenses in the criminal sphere. But yes, possibly poor Miss Mallew. So she lost because essentially what the court held, and this was ultimately the House of Lords, what they said was, well, when we're looking at wholly and exclusively, it's a subjective test, which means that we're looking at what is in the mind of the person making the decision. So why were they incurring this expense? But one need not only look at sort of their conscious intention, and some elements are so inextricably linked or so inevitable that they must be considered to have been part of the purpose. Yes, I can see you pulling a face, Graham. It's not a decision that I love in terms of logic.
So what they're doing is they're saying this is a subjective test, but objectively we know that X, Y, and Z are always part of the calculation.
Yes, and so what they said about Miss Mallew, well, no, they're very careful to say that isn't it, but yes, I think that is it. What they said about Miss Mallew was, well, she had to have clothes to stay warm and to cover herself.
Okay.
You know, and she was using them for that purpose when she was walking to and from court. Now, I always say she could just have walked to court in her jeans. You know, she didn't need them for that purpose. But unfortunately, that was the decision. And that was by I think it was a 4-1 majority in the House of Lords. So there was one dissenting judgment, which again, if you've got time, is worth reading. It's historically interesting only because we've gone long past Drummond and Mallew, particularly on this sort of this idea of inherent intrinsic purposes. There's been a lot of case law over the last 25 years in that respect, not in relation to barristers' clothing. I hasten to add, I think the female of the species gave up on that one and just got on with it fairly early doors. Unfortunately, possibly, mind you, my work clothes aren't that expensive. But yes, they.
Yeah, but you still take a deduction, right?
No, I don't, because of Drummond and Mallew.
You would if you could.
Of course I would if I could, yes. And so I think that when you look at that logic in Drummond and Mallew, the cosmetic surgery question becomes a bit more difficult. Because, so for example, you take let's start with the BBC article. They talk to an OnlyFans creator called Rebecca Goodwin, who creates adult content and has been doing for 4 years, but she had cosmetic surgery in 2020 to improve her income on the site. And what she says, and this is a direct quote, and I'm highlighting that because the language used is not mine. She said, "I wouldn't have had a boob job if it wasn't for doing this. I was feeling quite insecure and had to meet people's beauty standards."
Well, I think buried in there is not wholly exclusively. She said it's for one reason, but I'm also insecure, right?
Exactly. So first of all, I wouldn't have had it but for doing this job. Well, that's not the test. The test is whether or not it's only for that. And you can think of a lot of things that you might not buy or expenses you might not incur, but for a specific purpose, but they still have other purposes. So
to use like a solicitor may spend an extra £1,000 on a suit or £500 on a suit rather than what he would do if he wasn't a solicitor, because he's trying to present the image as a respectable and well-heeled solicitor, that he just wouldn't do, right? If he wasn't a solicitor. But it's not the same as it's wholly and exclusively for.
yes, but he's still going to wear that suit to his cousin's wedding, and he was always intending to, say, for example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. And so there is a distinction between the wholly and exclusively and not but for. Those are different. If you look at it as a Venn diagram, there isn't a lot of overlap in the middle, but they are different tests, I think is the question. And the correct test is wholly and exclusively for the purposes of. So that's the first thing. And secondly, as you point out, she said, I wouldn't have done it if I wasn't doing this. So I see this job. But she then goes on to say, I was feeling quite insecure and had to meet people's beauty standards. So I agree with you entirely, Graham. I can see that what she's saying is I wouldn't have had cosmetic surgery, and possibly if I weren't doing this job, I wouldn't have felt quite so insecure or as exposed to people's beauty standards. However, there does seem to be a personal non-business element there, at least for this lady, because
So if I was going to reword that sentence, I would say I wouldn't have done this if it wasn't for doing this. I can make more money if I have this done, right? That would be purely business, but she's talking about her own insecurity. So I think that
exactly, and indeed, again, Rebecca Goodwin, who has said that she has claimed for her cosmetic surgery, said that her accountant recognised instantly the surgery she'd paid for could be classed as an expense when she filed her tax return. And then I think, what did they go on? They say something like somewhere, where is it? So what HMRC did speak to the BBC. They said they don't provide assurances for specific cases, just in case anybody thought they did. They then went on to say, HMRC added, it's very unlikely that a non-health related operation would be an allowable expense when calculating profits. And I think I'm with them on this, because if Miss Matt, even say we were looking at Miss Goodwin and she'd said, as you said, I knew this would help me make more money. I really, really hate, I don't know, extremely large breasts or whatever it is, but I did it for my business. Even then, I think there's a problem with it being tax deductible, because where you have Drummond and Mallew, there's an intrinsic link between the change in appearance, and so an intrinsic purpose of changing the appearance and having the surgery. So from that perspective, I would be very interested to see the basis on which this was squared with Drummond and Mallew. Now, I find, as I've said, or as I've hinted to, I do find Drummond and Mallew a difficult case anyway. But if Drummond and Mallew is difficult, I think this is more difficult, because what they said there was, look, you're using these clothes to keep warm. You might have had other clothes you could have worn to keep warm. And it's hard to see how that could not be wholly and exclusively, but something which permanently alters your appearance could be.
Yeah. So what you're saying is she's going to she'll stop being an OnlyFans content provider, and she'll still have the appearance that she's given herself. And that will continue to have an impact on her life.
Exactly. And I would be very interested to see the circumstances of the content creator who is said to have had that accepted. Now, that's not Rebecca Goodwin, but apparently there's an accountant who said that they have had an OnlyFans content creator who has successfully excuse me, claimed tax relief for cosmetic surgery.
Yeah. So the BBC report says, despite some successful claims, HMRC added, it is very unlikely that a non-health related operation will be an allowable expense when calculating profits.
Yes. So I'd be interested to see what those circumstances were and how that was squared with Drummond and Mallow, because again, it's one of those things that it's not immediately obvious, but obviously possible.
I mean, this is a great example, isn't it, of old tax law from cases which just frankly wouldn't be like that today. Drummond and Mallow wouldn't end up like that if it went in front of the court today.
No, I don't think it would. And
Contrast between males getting their funny shaped waistcoat allowed and smart skirts not being allowed. I mean, that just wouldn't happen, would it?
It seems unlikely. It does seem unlikely. And I suspect if more male barristers actually wore the garb, more female barristers would have sought to claim for theirs. But I think the fact is not many people take advantage of that possible deductibility. I think the interesting thing is, though, as you say, I don't think Drummond and Mallow would be decided the way it was today. I don't think it should have been. Obviously, these were very, very competent judges in the highest court in the land. So it's a bold assertion to say that they were wrong. But one of them did disagree. There was a dissenting judgment, and I have to say that I think the dissenter was right in my view. And what you see in the case law around this, which is really interesting and much less racy, is a lot of the time trying to square this circle of what amounts to sort of an intrinsic purpose, because essentially it's a different way of saying we can override your subjective interpretation, your subjective intention, with our objective view of what your intention should have been, almost.
Is there an element of floodgates going on here?
I don't know. I mean, I think there's an element of everyone's bound by the House of Lords, and they can't go against it unless and until the Supreme Court say, oh, actually, no, we've moved on from there. That was wrong, or whatever it is. So essentially, it's going to take another barrister who can get, basically represent themselves going all the way, because nobody's going to make this point. If this is going to,
the money back isn't enough.
Yeah, if this point around whether or not there can be an intrinsic purpose which wasn't, or an unconscious purpose, I think if anything that's going to be decided in the sphere of tax avoidance, because what you get a lot now is HMRC alleging that notwithstanding that you had a clear business purpose, because there is a distinct tax advantage to doing it in one way or another, that was an intrinsic inherent purpose, even though it wasn't necessarily expressed. And there's a case called Scott's Atlantic Management, another one called, I think Harriet was in, which discuss this in more detail. But if this point is going to be resolved, I think that's where it's going to be resolved, possibly not by an OnlyFans content creator.
No, but I tell you what's interesting about how the way law is taught, if I may, that I bet you that what they will continue to teach Drummond and Mallow as a hard and fast rule, even if the other cases have basically changed the underlying principle. They will still say in the classes, clothes are not deductible because there's no interaction between the technical tax piece and the interesting case to talk about when you're lecturing.
Yeah, I think that's fair, but I think also people like hard and fast rules, because for the vast majority of us, there is no financial justification for getting somebody to come along and argue the margins.
Yeah.
And so the hard and fast rules, while not necessarily accurately expressed, which is something that drives me mad, because of course, even though in Drummond and Mallow the expense for clothes wasn't deductible, that doesn't mean that somebody else might not have had the intrinsic purpose. It's very hard to see on the facts of Drummond and Mallow that how anyone could, but theoretically that's possible. So I think, yes, I agree. It's not wholly accurate. It's probably more useful than teaching the wholly accurate position.
Yeah. Okay, so let's wrap this up. Is she going to win?
I don't think if Rebecca Goodwin, who was in the BBC article, if she gets an inquiry, I suspect she won't, because that statement that's quoted very publicly on the BBC website is not helpful to her at all in any shape or form. I think there is going to be maybe a little bit more publicity around this, because an MP has jumped in with both feet. This is Alexander Stafford, who is a Conservative MP on the Business Committee, and he told the Mail on Sunday, "I feel sure most taxpayers won't be happy to learn that tax allowances are being used in this way. Therefore, I think it is entirely right to review this loophole relating to cosmetic procedures and preferably close it as soon as possible."
What loophole? What loophole? There's no loophole. It's either allowed or it isn't. I can't stand that word. That doesn't mean anything, that word.
No, it's an awful word in most cases, but here it's so inaccurate it's untrue, isn't it? Which exactly. Is why I read the whole thing out, because I knew you'd enjoy it.
Anyway, so we think there's definitely some mileage, and there'll be much heat and not very much light, right?
Almost certainly, yes.
So, Harriet, it's been lovely to appear on Tax Snacks.
Thank you for
inviting me on.
No, it's been our great pleasure, and come back again.
Well, there's rumor, isn't there, that we're going to do something with another barrister from Old Square Tax.
That's absolutely right. Yes, we have got you lined up to talk about important international tax concepts with Rebecca Sheldon of Tax Chambers, not Rebecca Goodwin of OnlyFans.
I don't think that's appropriate.
Well, I'm not sure how much she knows about international tax, Graham, frankly.
No, she doesn't. Well, otherwise she wouldn't be making a claim, would she? So,
what?
All right. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.
See you soon. Thank you for listening.